What would you do if the very man who had lifted you from a forgotten imperial descendant to the pinnacle of an empire suddenly forced you to abandon your wife and marry his own daughter instead? 2,000 years ago, in the imperial palace of Chang'an, China, the 17-year-old Emperor Liu Xun was facing exactly such a deadly choice. In the center of the grand hall knelt the officials of the empire, yet their eyes were not fixed on the young emperor sitting upon the dragon throne. Instead, they were all staring at an elderly man seated just below him, a white-haired figure whose presence was as intimidating as a tiger. This was General Huo Guang. The old man was the true ruler of the vast empire. Just days earlier, he had removed an emperor simply because that emperor would not obey him. Now, with a gaze that appeared kind on the surface but concealed the instincts of a predator, he looked at the young emperor he had personally placed on the throne, Liu Xun. And on this day, the court officials had jointly submitted a memorial. Officially, it was a request for the emperor to choose an empress. In reality, it was a political ultimatum. They were demanding that the emperor marry Huo Guang's daughter, Huo Pingjun. 17-year-old Liu Xun sat on the dragon throne, his hands trembling slightly beneath his imperial robes. He knew that if he uttered a single word of refusal, he might not live to see the next sunrise. But he also knew that if he agreed, his commoner wife, the woman who had endured countless freezing winters with him in poverty, and who at that very moment was holding their newborn son in a side chamber, would be torn apart by the machinery of politics. So what would he choose? Welcome to A Different Story. I'm Jason. Today, we're going to tell the story of an emperor whose life became a legendary tale of love and revenge. From imperial blood to the streets. If Hollywood were ever to make a movie about an underdog rising to the top, Liu Xun's story would deserve an Oscar. When he was only a few months old, his great-grandfather, Emperor Wu of Han, one of the most powerful and also one of the most superstitious rulers in Chinese history, unleashed a political storm that swept across the entire empire. After listening to accusations from court sorcerers, Emperor Wu became convinced that the crown prince was using witchcraft to curse him. The result was catastrophic. The crown prince's entire family, including Liu Xun's grandfather, parents, and aunt, was wiped out in a single political purge. Still an infant, Liu Xun became the sole survivor. He was thrown into one of the empire's most notorious prisons, a place reserved for serious criminals. A baby wrapped in swaddling clothes had almost no chance of surviving in a filthy prison filled with fleas, disease, and the stench of death. Fortunately, a prison official named Bing Ji took pity on him. Knowing the child was innocent, Bing Ji risked his own life and secretly arranged for 2 female prisoners to serve as wet nurses, raising Liu Xun inside the prison walls. When Liu Xun was 5 years old, Emperor Wu issued a general amnesty shortly before his death. At last, the boy walked out of prison. But although he was free, he was also a complete drifter. He had no money, no recognized status as a member of the imperial family, and survived only on the small amount of support provided by relatives from his grandmother's side. Over the next decade, he wandered the streets of Chang'an, spending time in gambling houses, cockfighting arenas, and the city's rough neighborhoods. Many historical records later noted that he enjoyed associating with people from every walk of life and developed a deep understanding of ordinary society. At this point, he looked far more like a street kid than a future emperor. That was when he met Xu Guang'an and his daughter, Xu Pingjun. A $1 million love letter from the slums. Xu Guang'an's life had been just as unfortunate. He had once been a minor government official, but after making a mistake at work, he was sentenced to castration and later assigned to work in an imperial workshop. His daughter, Xu Pingjun, had already been engaged to be married, but her fiancé died not long afterward. Before long, people around her began whispering that she was cursed and brought bad luck to the men in her life. These 2 forgotten souls eventually crossed paths with Liu Xun. Xu Guanghan noticed something unusual about the young man who spent his days roaming the streets. Although Liu Bingyi was desperately poor, he learned incredibly fast, spoke with intelligence and confidence, and carried himself with a quiet dignity that was difficult to explain. Convinced there was something special about him, Xu Guanghan decided to marry his daughter to Liu Bingyi. It would prove to be both the happiest and the most tragic decision of Xu Pingjun's life. Their marriage was marked by poverty. Liu Bingyi had no steady income and often relied on the generosity of friends to get by. Yet Xu Pingjun never complained. She worked tirelessly from dawn until night, managing the household and doing whatever was necessary to support the family. When Liu Bingyi came home injured, she cleaned and bandaged his wounds. When officials looked down on him because of his disgraced family background, she comforted him by lamplight and reminded him of his worth. To everyone else, Liu Bingyi was either a dangerous remnant of a fallen political faction or a worthless street thug with no future. Only Xu Pingjun believed that one day he would become a man of true greatness. Not long afterward, their son, Liu Shi, was born. Inside a small, drafty house, Liu Bingyi held his newborn son in his arms and watched his wife busily working nearby. For the first time in his life, he felt that perhaps being an ordinary man would be enough. But fate has a habit of striking when happiness seems most secure. A throne from heaven and a dance with the devil. In 74 BC, the Han Empire was thrown into turmoil. The young Emperor Zhao of Han suddenly died without leaving behind an heir. The empire's most powerful statesman, Huo Guang, immediately began searching for a successor. His first choice was Liu He, the Prince of Changyi. But after taking the throne, Liu He proved to be wildly unpredictable. Huo Guang acted swiftly. After only 27 days, he launched a coup and removed the new emperor from power. I've previously made a separate video about Liu. He's a remarkable story. If you haven't seen it, you can find the link in this video's description after you're finished watching. Now, Huo Guang needed another emperor. More precisely, he needed a safe emperor. Someone with no political backing, no independent power base, and ideally someone who would be grateful for the opportunity. That was when Bingji, the same man who had once saved Liu Bingyi's life in prison, recommended the young man who had grown up among commoners. Huo Guang agreed. And just like that, a street kid became the son of heaven overnight. But Liu Bingyi quickly realized that what he had inherited was not a throne, it was a volcano. To be fair, Huo Guang was not simply a villain. Without his leadership, the Han Empire might have descended into chaos long before this. Yet for Liu Bingyi, the man who had saved the empire was also the greatest shadow hanging over his life. So he immediately adjusted his survival strategy. He played dumb. Whatever Huo Guang suggested, he agreed to. Whoever Huo Guang recommended, he appointed. He carefully disguised himself as a naive young man dazzled by wealth and power, someone with little experience and even less ambition. Gradually, Huo Guang lowered his guard. Then came the controversy over choosing an empress. The ultimate symbolism of an old sword. Huo Guang's hunger for power had no limits. Controlling the government was not enough. He wanted his bloodline woven into the future of the imperial family itself. His wife, Huo Xian, was even more obsessed with power. Day after day, she pressured Huo Guang to place their youngest daughter, Huo Chengjun, in the palace as empress. The opportunists at court immediately understood what was expected of them. Before long, memorials began pouring in, all urging the emperor to make Huo Chengjun his empress. This was the very situation we saw at the beginning of the story. If Liu Bingyi had been nothing more than a political animal, the logical choice would have been obvious. He could simply go along with the plan, marry Huo Chengjun, demote Xu Pingjun to an ordinary consort, or even send her back into obscurity. After all, what was a commoner's love compared to political survival? But Liu Bingyi was not a heartless man. He did not want to abandon the woman who had stood beside him through every hardship. Yet he also knew he could not simply say, "I refuse to marry Huo Chengjun. I will make Xu Pingjun my empress." If he did, Huoguang would see it as a direct challenge to his authority, and when powerful regents felt threatened, emperors had a habit of being removed or dying unexpectedly. The air in the throne room seemed frozen. Everyone waited for the emperor's answer. Slowly, Liu Bingyi rose to his feet. He showed no anger. He offered no argument. In fact, there was even a faint smile on his face, a smile so mild that it almost looked submissive. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, but his words stunned everyone in the hall. During the years I lived among the common people, I once lost an old sword that I treasured deeply. It was not beautiful, nor was it valuable, but it had been with me for many years, and I have missed it ever since. I wonder if any of my ministers could help me find it. This became one of the most famous political statements in Chinese history, the Edict of the Old Sword. It was a masterpiece of political communication. First, it perfectly embodied the virtues that emperors were expected to uphold. If the emperor could not even forget an old sword from his years of hardship, then surely he was a man of loyalty, gratitude, and deep feeling. Huoguang could hardly criticize him for being too devoted. Second, it was a brilliant piece of symbolism. In ancient China, a sword was often associated with a man's closest companion and was sometimes used as a metaphor for a wife. By asking for his old sword to be returned, Liu Bingyi was really saying, "I will not abandon my first wife." Most importantly, he never confronted Huoguang directly. Instead, he placed the decision in the hands of the court. He simply asked, "Which of my ministers can help me find it?" The officials were not fools. Years of political survival had sharpened their instincts. They immediately understood the hidden message behind the emperor's words. This young ruler appeared weak, but he was willing to risk offending the most powerful man in the empire for the sake of one woman. That meant he possessed remarkable patience, determination, and independence. More importantly, everyone understood another reality. One day Huoguang would die, and when that day came, the emperor would remember exactly who had stood with the Huo family and who had not. Almost overnight, the political winds shifted. Officials who had previously rushed to flatter Huoguang suddenly began changing their positions, eager to leave themselves an escape route for the future. Meanwhile, Huoguang sat at home reading the latest memorials, his expression growing darker with each one. For the first time, he realized that this supposedly naive young emperor had outmaneuvered him. In November of 74 BC, Xu Pingjun, the daughter of a common family, officially placed the phoenix crown upon her head and became empress of the Han Empire. In a struggle without swords or armies, the 17-year-old emperor had used an invisible old sword to cut a small but undeniable crack into the iron wall surrounding him. But this was only the beginning of a far more tragic story. An imperfect ending. In Hollywood movies, once the hero and heroine overcome every obstacle and finally end up together, the credits begin to roll. But history is not a movie. More often than not, history reveals its sharpest fangs only after the happy ending. After Xu Pingjun became empress, the person most enraged was Huoguang's wife. In her eyes, that position should have belonged to her own daughter. And so, hatred began to grow. In 71 BC, Xu Pingjun became pregnant once again. After giving birth, she was left extremely weak and required constant medical care and recovery. Huoxian saw an opportunity. She bribed palace attendants and arranged for poison to be mixed into the empress's medicine. Not long afterward, Xu Pingjun died. She was only 22 years old. Before her death, Xu Pingjun tightly grasped Liu Bingyi's sleeve. She looked at the man she had loved her entire life, the man she had accompanied from misery to glory, and her eyes were filled with reluctance to leave him behind. Liu Bingyi held his wife's lifeless body in his arms and said nothing for a very long time. The woman who had suffered hunger beside him, endured humiliation with him, and stood by him through the darkest years of his life had finally made it all the way to the imperial palace. But she would never walk beside him through the rest of it. Of course, Liu Bingyi knew this was no accident, but he also knew that he still lacked the power to confront the Huo family directly. A few days later, he ordered a full investigation. Terrified, Huo Xian confessed the truth to Huo Guang. To protect his family, Huo Guang used his immense influence to suppress the case. In the end, it was officially closed for lack of evidence. From that moment on, Liu Bingyi changed. He buried all of his grief, hatred, and rage deep within himself. Then he did something that no one could understand. He married Xu Pingjun, and he made her empress. At that moment, Liu Bingyi stopped being a survivor. He became a hunter, and he knew exactly what he had to do. He had to wait for the most powerful man in the Huo family to leave this world. A revenge long delayed. In the years following Xu Pingjun's death, the Huo family reached the height of its arrogance. The new empress, Xu Pingjun, lived a life of extraordinary luxury inside the palace. They believed they had won. They believed the young emperor was nothing more than a weak puppet who could be manipulated at will. But they forgot one thing. Time is a puppet emperor's greatest ally and a powerful regent's greatest enemy. In 68 BC, Huo Guang, the formidable statesman who had dominated the empire for 2 decades, died of illness. On the night he received the news, Liu Bingyi sat alone in his study for a long time. He did not smile. He simply rested his hand on the old sword hanging at his waist, now worn with age and rust. Liu Bingyi's revenge would become a textbook example of patience. First, he granted Huo Guang a funeral of the highest possible honor. He even attended the mourning ceremonies in person, allowing the Huo family to believe that the emperor remained deeply grateful. Then, little by little, he began replacing key officials, reclaiming military authority, and promoting loyal supporters. Everything happened quietly. The Huo family eventually sensed the danger. Huo Xian grew increasingly afraid. She knew that if the truth about Xu Pingjun's death ever came to light, her entire family would be doomed. So they began plotting a coup. But by then, Liu Bingyi was no longer the helpless young man he had once been. In 66 BC, before the Huo family could make their move, imperial troops surrounded the Huo estate. The Huo clan was completely purged. A family that had once stood at the pinnacle of power, a family that had dominated the empire itself, collapsed almost overnight. Xu Pingjun was deposed and spent the rest of her life under confinement. Everyone involved in the poisoning of Xu Pingjun was punished. 6 years earlier, Liu Bingyi had been forced to watch helplessly as his wife died. 6 years later, he made the entire Huo family pay for that poisoned cup. In this 6-year struggle of power and political intrigue, Liu Bingyi emerged victorious. He secured his throne and went on to become one of the most accomplished emperors in Chinese history. Under his rule, the Han Empire entered another golden age of economic prosperity and military strength. Yet in the hearts of many people, the most moving image of Liu Bingyi is not that of a successful emperor. It is the image of a 17-year-old boy standing in a freezing court hall, surrounded by powerful enemies, stubbornly searching for an old sword. After Xu Pingjun's death, Liu Bingyi named their son Liu Xu as crown prince. Even though the boy later proved somewhat mediocre and at times indecisive, officials repeatedly urged the emperor to replace him. Each time, Liu Bingyi gave the same answer: "This is the child Pingjun and I had together." And he never explained any further. More than 2,000 years have passed since then. Yet this story still reminds us that in a world filled with ambition, betrayal, and endless political calculation, there was once an emperor at the very peak of power who was willing to risk his entire political future to protect the woman who had loved him when he had nothing. That old rusted sword was never truly lost. It remained at the side of the young man named Liu Bingyi. It cut through conspiracies, it pierced the darkness, and it became one of the most romantic and most tragic symbols of love in Chinese history. Thank you for watching A Different Story. I'm Jason. See you next time.